Hey everybody, it's Mike Shea from slyflourish.com and twitter.com/slyflourish. And this is the DM's Deep Dive right here on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. This is a show in which we pick a particular topic relevant to D&D and pick a guest and dive deep into the topic. And today I am here with Teos Abadia. Teos, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. Mike, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Rudy. The newest thing I've done is that I got to participate in writing a hardback book, Acquisitions Incorporated.
That's true. I saw it. I have it on my dining room table.
Woohoo!
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
it's
Well done.
getting really good reviews. Thank you, everybody. And prior to that, I've written a lot of different adventures. So that's my biggest thing that I've done. Though I broke out of that for the Acquisitions Incorporated book and did a lot of other types of work. And I've been involved heavily in organized play.
Awesome. Yeah, one of the things that I find most fascinating about the Acquisitions Incorporated book is it feels to me like that book is skating where the puck is going to be, right? With the popularity of streaming content, the idea of an official WotC hardback book that's built on the framework of a more than 10-year-old streaming game, right?
Right. Yeah.
Streaming it through podcasting and various shows.
Yeah.
So I'm fascinated by that. It's a really cool product. And what I'm most fascinated by is the blend of the WotC clear and clean design with humor at the same time.
Thanks. That was a big part of it.
Yeah, I don't know how you pulled that off.
A lot of hours of work.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
And a great team. I mean, the whole team was amazing. So,
right.
Sean Merwin,
Yep.
Scott Fitzgerald Gray,
Fantastic.
the whole Penny Arcade team. I mean, a lot of those tables all come from different Penny Arcade members. So it just shows you the kind of talent they have just around the office, right?
That is awesome.
The art, and it's just a lot of people there.
That's awesome. Today, so you and I were on a show, on this very show, I think like a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
Is that about right? And our topic then was building encounters. And the reason that show happened is you and I got in a discussion on Twitter. I don't even want to say a heated discussion, right? Like, I don't think it was heated exactly, but we kind of debated and dissected this topic from a number of different angles. And I said, this would make a good show. And we went on and talked about encounter balance. And then unfortunately, we both like completely agreed with each other the whole time.
Yeah.
Right? Or I kind of agreed with you the whole time. So we'll see if that happens again. I give it pretty good odds that even though you and I had about ignore the cat on my shoulder, by the way.
Do you have any rats in your room?
No, because I can't find any heroic level 1 adventures to take care of the rats. We'll get to the rats, my friend.
Yeah.
So I give this show about a 50-50 chance that it's going to turn out we agree with each other already.
Yeah.
But we'll see. And so the last show covered building encounters, and it started off with we started off the show with let's build an encounter. It was your idea. Hey, why don't we build an encounter on the show? And you built a really interesting encounter about two Ettins that are fighting, or the two Ettins where it's so hard to explain, right? It's so complicated. A head on each one love each other, but the two heads on each Ettin don't like each other.
Yes.
Right? This really interesting like love quadrangle.
Yeah.
Of two Ettin heads, which is a
cross head love. It's a classic tale.
Right. I guess. And it was a great, the concept for the story. And what was interesting to me about it is you started it with that idea, right? It wasn't how do you build an encounter for a group of level 3 characters, right? I think in our hypothesis it was
right.
That we have a bunch of level 3 characters. And then we did the math later and it's like, that ain't gonna work, right?
That's
like
not gonna work. Yeah.
Ettins are gonna kick the crap out of level 3. And my, my feeling, I listened to it again today because I wanted to make sure that we didn't just kind of tread the same ground again in this show. But I thought about it, I was like, I'd still put that encounter in, right? Like, they'll argue with each other. Like, there's this big disadvantage because you got these heads who hate each other, and I don't know. It seems like it would make an interesting encounter. But you and I had a discussion on Twitter again recently, and I think it started from an article that I wrote called "Two Thugs in the Woods," in which I proposed that if you want to see how your players are going to act in a situation that doesn't have a clear just throw, and you want to be simple, just have two thugs in the woods and the characters can stumble upon them and they can deal with them. And I think, and I'm paraphrasing, so correct but correct me if I'm wrong, but your question was, at what point is that appropriate for a range of characters, and at what point is that just so weak
Well, and
that it doesn't?
I think it was two things. So you wrote that, which I thought was actually a great blog post, and I didn't really have any issue with that. So see, we're already agreeing, which is
Right. It's
a
gonna be the
shame.
most boring show. Sorry, James. James is like, you guys, we've been billing a fight for like a week. You got to have one. I'm like, I don't think that's going to happen. But
I mean, really, what it is I think that you and I model the types of fights we would like to have on Twitter, like not actual like
right, like nice
stuff
calm
or
discussions.
No actual hatred or doxing. Right. Like it's literally we pretend to disagree and then in the end we hug. That's really.
What's your favorite edition of D&D Teos?
Whatever you like.
That's no good. Whatever one you like, crap.
Well, what you like is crap, and I just changed which one I like.
World imaginable for D&D.
GURPS is the best.
Yeah, Chartmaster.
I've got Cinnabar on my shelf. But so what it was actually I was reading product placement.
Oh, look at that!
Right. So it even look, you can tell it's real because I have things in it.
Just saying, like I just happen to keep a copy. Oh, mine's the hardback. Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. We both happen to have copies sitting on our desk. It's perfectly reasonable to have my copy on my desk. I don't know about yours.
Yeah, I mean, I've got AI right there. Acquisitions Incorporated.
Yep.
Pick it up at your local store. So I was reading it, and in it you say you kind of come up with this premise of a tower with goblins and hobgoblins and stuff, but I didn't see that you addressed at any point kind of like, by the way, my characters are X level. And so I was like, would you do this at level 1, at 20? Like, do you care? And so it tied into that thugs thing because of that. Because I was kind of like, well, is Mike at all caring about the level of his
ever think about character level? Yeah.
And I think your answer was, I'm sort of thinking on a tier level.
Yeah, and I think about, so I probably think a little bit more at character level. And somewhere between character and tier, because the tiers are pretty wide. And that was interesting that like as our conversation went on, it sort of switched into this other mode later on.
Because of your bad wrong idea on rats.
Because of my bad wrong idea on rats. Awesome, epic rats. And man, that adventure is gonna sell so well. So the now I lost my train of thought because I'm thinking about rats. Giant rats.
Adapting the goblins.
Right. And my idea was like that the story of the character level starts even before you start thinking about like a hobgoblin in a ruined castle. That you think about like, well, when does a hobgoblin ruined castle make sense? And you could probably start that at level 1. They're just not dealing with the whole castle at level 1.
Right.
They're dealing with the 3 goblins that happen to work for the warlord. Right. They run into them on the road, and and the goblins are like a little bit more arrogant because they happen to have this warlord behind them, that they support, right? And you can kind of build from there. But it kind of switched to the other side because I do feel like there are appropriate stories at given levels of play in D&D, and and then the one that gets to the rats in the cellar is level 1. Right. And I think our conversation is like, what is an and I don't even like the word exactly, but like, what is an appropriate adventure for level 1 characters? So I'll throw that question to you.
Yeah.
What do you see as an appropriate story? So sorry, let me dive, go 3 things back, which is you start with the story, but the story is based on leveling, right? And like lower level characters have particular types of story that match that level, and then it sort of scales up. And like the Dungeon Master's Guide covers this tiers of play. And I'm being loose, but it's essentially town and local stuff, sort of city and regional stuff, world stuff, and then planar stuff.
Yeah. And 4E had the same thing going on.
Yeah, I think, did it do it every 3? Did it have 3 tiers?
Yeah, 3 tiers.
Yeah. Okay. And it was sort of that like local, world, and big.
The heroic paragon.
Yeah, and I tell you, he's not your problem. I got that quote again. Ignore the cat. He is irrelevant to this discussion. I'm just a launch pad, frankly. And I would even argue, and this isn't like in the DMG or anything, but I argue that level 1 is like its own game. right? It's like a whole separate thing. Like when it comes to encounter balance, when it comes to the stories we tell, when it comes to the kind of things that characters can do, when it comes to like how we run the game, I kind of am more and more treating level 1 as its own thing. I actually think it doesn't work particularly well to have adventures that are scaled for level 1 to 4, because the power difference between a level 1 and a level 4 character is way bigger than a
But
level
here,
5 to
but
level.
you're talking about mechanics here, right?
Yes, but the mechanics tell the story, right? There's a
Really?
difference. Well, so this is what we're going to discuss today, right? That a level 1 character means something in a story, and only having 9 hit points and getting your ass kicked by a giant centipede
Yeah.
is a fictional mechanism. It's a fictional,
Sure.
frame.
Yeah.
Which is where the rats in the basement come in. That, like, when we think about a suitable adventure, like I joked about it, and I joked about it in the tweet, and then you and I had about 100 follow-up tweets, right? But the joke in my tweet was that, like, level 1 is your rats in the basement level. Right?
Yeah.
But okay, so I'm building groundwork. But what do you think are appropriate stories for? We'll start with level 1. Let's pick on level 1.
Okay. So I agree that mechanically, the level 1 PCs are really very different. They're very fragile. It's your deadliest level for sure. Like that's where you can expect your deaths. It's where you could blow away a new player who was like, "Wait, what? I'm dead."
Yeah, you get a crit, right? One crit on a goblin.
Right.
Could be.
Yeah, and fifth edition is much more deadly at level 1 than 4E was.
Yes.
I think it's comparable with 3E. 3E had like orcs with a great axe would just kill anybody if they crit. So you're back into that territory. But I don't agree that the story needs to be separate for them.
Okay.
I don't feel, but I will say that it's useful. It's useful to think of like the local, the heroic, the local, the regional, the planar, world spanning, that kind of thing. That can be a helpful device to keep in mind. For me, it's primarily because the world should make sense. So when I'm making a story, I want it to make sense. Like it's a little weird that in Tomb of Annihilation, level 1 heroes are the ones that are hired to go off and stop the death curse.
Right. That's a common problem.
It's a little, now, of course.
Oh my God, everyone's dying. Level 1 heroes, you're the ones in charge.
Yeah, I'm teleporting you.
Right. I'm like a 19th level wizard.
Right. Yeah, so, it's a bit, there's some issues with that for sure. So I think it's good to keep that in mind as a construct. And I think that it is really good. Someone mentioned that, I think it was Tom mentioned that it's good to remember some of the fun classic play that comes when you're young and you're like afraid of everything.
Right.
And to have the pace work that way, right? To where you're like, oh man, I'm going down the steps. Is there something on the steps? Right? Because as we get older, we're just like, there's steps. And if there's something on the steps, it's probably level appropriate, right? So I think it's helpful to have that sort of wonder and that worry that comes with lower levels. But I don't think the story needs to be only a story for level 1.
So what do you see as like a good and bad story for level 1? What's a good story for, like, off the top of your head, make up an adventure?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, like, I don't know. I think it has to be, to me, the key with the story is the story needs to be, it needs to make sense. It needs to be compelling and engaging, right? And if it and feel like what I want out of this experience, right? Whether I'm a new player or I'm a very old player, this should be a thing that I want to participate in, right? Like we don't watch movies and have movies that start us off on some like day job level of adventure, right? It's excitement from the beginning. It's compelling. It's a neat narrative. It's compelling stakes, right? There's risk and reward going on. That's always kind of happening, right? Like, what level are the people in Lord of the Rings? Kind of all over the place, but it's all one neat story, right? It's a great story. Same thing in The Hobbit, right? Like most of these novels or movies we grew up with, like they're just cool stories, and they don't need to be a particular level cast member. And the cast member will either dodge things by luck, or they happen to be super awesome, and that's part of the story. But we get to be heroes, and we get to go through this engaging narrative.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, my wife and I were talking today about Lord of the Rings and the stories and the fact that, like, Frodo's level 1 and ring wraiths are after his ass, right?
Yeah,
But he kind of has to run from all of them all the time too.
yeah,
You and I know our players, right? And
yeah,
like
yeah,
having like, hey, for a fourth of this campaign, you're going to be running from wraiths,
yeah.
instead of
Well,
like
and
two
if you think
skeletons.
about the combats, like it's literally like every hobbit taking the dodge action every round for every fight, right? Till like something happens
I
to
think
where the combat ends.
Sam does some damage with the pan,
True.
right?
Yeah,
I
I
think
mean,
pretty
it's
early
a
on.
third of the way through their travel that they finally
Right.
get a little bit of sword training in, right? Like
Right.
it's yeah, it's kind of funny. But so they're always movie versus game things. I mean,
Well,
it's
and
easy
that's
to
right.
want to roll
That
every
movie versus game thing is kind of important, right? That like the things that happen. This is like why boss fights in D&D are very different from boss fights in movies.
yeah,
Because like a boss fight in the movie, you get to kind of decide the pacing and what happens. And in D&D, it's like I force cage him, right? And like, oh, he's done, right? Now he's got to negotiate because he's stuck in a force cage. So sometimes that's cool though, right? Sometimes that goes
yeah. There
that's
goes
really
my
interesting.
dog. It's
Yeah.
my pet
Barking
time.
at my cat. Yeah. So rats in a cellar, right? It's like to me, yeah, I joke about it, but like my common joke, and I saw he's not your problem is in our chat here, and he brought up that the 5e hardback adventures keep characters at level 1 for too long, and I agree. I agree with him. I think a lot of them. I can't think through them all, but I know at least the last 2 that I've run, I've leveled them faster than that because I want them out of level 2 fast. And I
Mm-hmm.
always joke that like level 1 should be a stern conversation and a giant rat in the basement, right? Like that to me is what level 1 should be, and then you're kind of off. But thinking about like as soon as I said like rats in the basement, and we're like, it's sort of like the gym teacher hired you to go down and clean out the cellars, right?
Yeah.
But then I was like immediately, and it's already come up in chat, which is graveyard shift. I don't know if you're a Stephen King fan. Are you a Stephen King fan?
No, I mean, I
So
not something I'm super familiar with his
I'm going
writing.
to read you a quote from Graveyard Shift. The rat filled the whole gully at the far end of the noxious tomb. It was a huge and pulsating, gray, eyeless, and totally without legs. When Hall's light struck it, it made a hideous mewling noise. Their queen, then, the Magna Mater, a huge and nameless thing whose progeny might someday develop wings. It seemed to dwarf what remained of Warwick, but that was probably just an illusion. It was the shock of seeing a rat as big as a Holstein calf. Right? This whole story gave me nightmare. I read it when I was like 14 and I
Yeah,
had nightmares forever. And my D&D love and those nightmares had like the same trajectory.
yeah,
Right? That is, if you want like a scary ass rat story, that's
sure.
epic. That
Yeah,
is like your epic rat story. And I mean, not so it isn't like DMs need to tell, this isn't Mike Shea saying DMs need to tell the cellar and the rat story. There's no other way to begin your D&D adventure other than rats in the cellar. But there is this idea that like you can pretty much make anything epic,
sure.
right?
Yeah,
And like I had an epic fight on, yesterday. No, was it yesterday? I think it was no, Dave, a week from last Sunday. I'm running Ghost of Saltmarsh, and I had an epic fight against giant centipedes. Right. And what made it epic was like some of the humor where like the groups went in from different angles. And one character like surprised another one by bursting out of the door. And the first character at first is like, oh, you jerk. And then goes, And it's because one of them has the giant centipede on his back and doesn't know it yet. Right. And then they're like freaking out about these giant centipedes. And the guy
yeah.
like thunder wave and it blows the whole back of the house off, killing the centipedes, but also waking up everything else in the house. You
Uh-huh.
know, and like the battle took like 5 minutes, not even,
Right.
right? But it scared, like you said, it scared them,
Yeah, it's
right?
scary.
They're worried about everything, right?
Well, and Saltmarsh does a great job of setting that up, where it kind of starts with haunted and
Right.
like bad kind of stories about it, and it gives you some sort of reason to fear it, which I think is especially effective
Right.
for a new player. Right?
Right.
Like I run a lot of new players, and it's interesting how some scenarios like that, the, everybody's like, okay, I'm ready to go in.
Right. Yeah. That's yeah. So I think at one point in our Twitter conversation, and again, I'm paraphrasing, so I'm probably wrong, but you said something like players don't like low level battles like that. You know, they want more epic stories.
Yeah, and what I really mean is like, so like, it's really easy for a designer, especially a new designer, to be like, okay, rats in the basement. Here's this tavern. Talk to the guy or gal. She says, hey, I've got rats downstairs. To which I'm like, if you've got rats downstairs, they can't be that big a problem, right? Like, apparently you've had this problem for some number of days or something.
About the rat
So,
that's the size of a Holstein calf,
right. So like
eyeless,
that
really
is
eyeless and
that
totally
is
without legs.
that needs to be set up differently, right? Like if you've got giant rats in your tavern basement,
Right.
that's not insignificant. That's not like having
Right.
a
It's a
couple in
big
your
problem,
right.
right? And like they didn't take care of it themselves.
They could kill all of us. Like,
Right.
why are
Our
you
whole
in the
business
tavern?
is right.
Right?
Right.
Like
The
you can't go.
village is abandoning. Right.
What is
Everyone's
your
leaving the
food
village.
rating?
Yeah, your Yelp score is in the toilet, man.
Right.
Hey, the
So,
burger wasn't bad, but then I got
yeah.
bit by a giant rat. And now my
Well, and so then the next part is if the designer goes in and says, okay, there is one set of stairs, there's barrels on one side and heaps of sack, and they've been kind of opened up a bit, and there are 5 giant rats.
right.
And then probably, oh, look, there happens to be a secret door, some other concealed, surprise kind of thing that has to, that's sort of you're like, and there's something else going on. But to me, that's bad design. Like that's not what we're looking for to engage today's audience. You want more than that. What Stephen King gave you was something very different, right? He gives you like a level of like, get ready for this. This is serious. And then he probably backs it up in the novel with what's a very, like that's not just like one guy hits it and it's dead, right?
Right.
So
I think 5 giant rats is pretty awful at level 1.
maybe it could be, but again, I think it could be really boring if it's just done.
So I think I don't have any data to back this up, but I think that when we talk about new DMs, like certainly, so one of the things I do is I go and I lurk in the D&D Facebook group, which has like 150,000 people in it, and they're all clearly many of them new to this game and figuring things out, and it's really interesting to kind of keep a thumb in a community that I don't, that isn't just my friends on Twitter, right? And I see a lot of what kind of comes out, a lot of crazy ass house rules that come up, right? And you're like, there's a lot of eye rolling with like, oh yeah, I don't know what you're thinking, but I'm able to scroll pretty quickly. But I don't tend to see people that are building adventures that are too mundane. I see them doing the opposite, which is I'm going to have them fight a Balor at level 1. Right? Like there's going to be Grazd and his 2 Balor princes are taking over an entire city, and the characters are going to face off against them. And you're like, that's going to work. And, especially, yeah. So I usually see the opposite, which is they read like the whole monster manual and they sort of pick the most interesting things.
Right.
And if then they often get stuck in that, like, oh, I got to make a Balor suitable for level 1.
Oh.
So I'll give it like 4 hit points. Right.
Ooh,
and now I've got a Balor with 4 hit points, and they'll be able to shoot it with a bow and kill it, and that'll be cool. And you're like, no,
I will say, Mike,
a real Balor. What's that?
I will say, not just to be contrary, but I will say that
apparently that's what the audience wants.
Yeah, fight. Let me tell you why you're wrong, man.
There you go. Now we're talking.
No, well, I will say that for many years when I was younger, and I was like 12, like it was super awesome to do things like that. We did stuff like, my character's name is the Dragon Slayer. So DM, I want to fight one of each chromatic dragon. And I did, were the fights always fair? Not important. What is important is that I killed a lot of dragons.
You rolled a 12 on an D20. Awesome. The dragon is killed.
I was super happy, right? Like it was the best. And, so it can all be fine,
right? If
that's your game, right? And that's always the number one thing is, are people happy, right? If you're throwing a level 1 made up Balor and your party's having a blast, you're a great DM and it's all going well. But if it's not, if it's a train wreck, that's where you want to go back and say, where did I go wrong?
The Balor, they were killed by the fiery aura alone. Like the Balor didn't even do anything.
Maybe it's when the tavern keeper said, I have a Balor problem in my basement that you went wrong.
Balor's 5 giant Balors downstairs. they're killing my business.
Oh, and could you get the grease traps while you're
By the
down
way,
there?
while you're down there, there's a rat too. So, so I there's part of me. So we were talking about it, and this is one of those where like a lot of times I'm on Twitter and I'm like, wow, if Teos is saying this, I'm probably wrong, right? Like sometimes I'll throw out an idea. Usually it takes 2 or 3 of you, right? But sometimes it might just be one of you. Like it's one thing where I'm like, wow, if James Intercasso, James Hake, and Teos all and Sam and Sean Merwin all say I'm an idiot, I'm probably an idiot. Right? Like the one that comes to mind, this is probably worth a whole other show, is the player archetype descriptions, the tactician and role player. And I think those are all really, really useful until you try to apply them to human beings and then they fall apart. But like everybody disagrees with me. I'm like, Robin Laws wrote a book about it.
Right,
so sure. Shut up, right? Like I'm probably, my opinion is probably wrong.
Well, what it probably is that you don't gain benefit from it.
Right.
For whatever reason. So you're either like not getting the benefit you should, or you're already getting that benefit some other means. So it's just superfluous, right? It's probably a more accurate thing. And on the same level, like where you're saying like, oh, I was listening to you and thought I was wrong. Like, so I was reading your book thinking like, is he really just like coming up with a premise where it's hobgoblins and goblins, and then like he's going to make it work for whatever tier of play? Like maybe I'm doing everything wrong. Like maybe that's how you should do it. So I was the same.
Yeah. So that and we'll I think we can. Sure. Let's dive into that topic because I can't remember what else we're going to talk about. So that is one where I think it's useful to think about the tier of play that fits, right? And that I think when I wrote it, I said that's a good tier 1. It's a first tier, 1st to 5th level, 1st to 4th level environment, maybe a little higher because I think some of the guys in there were pretty tough. But I don't think there was, of all the dudes that are sort of laid out in that scenario.
Yeah.
I don't think any were higher. Like I think the half dragon was the worst, right? And he's like CR2 or something like that.
Okay.
So that felt like a good 1st to 4th level tier. Now it doesn't mean that you and your 5 guys walk up to the front gate and knock and be like, "Hey, ogres, screw you," right? Like, but I could see taking that situation and turning it into a tier 1 adventure, like where the characters go from 1st to 5th level. And if I were running that now, and I think I get into this in other areas in the book. Like I have to kind of dig it up, but I'm pretty sure I get into this. I think I talk about leveling out of 1st level quickly.
I think you do.
I should have. Yeah, I think that's in there. And my argument would be like when you run into those 3 goblins and they're like, what, I forget the guy's name, Volok, right? When Volok hears about this, you're screwed. Like he's gonna come and take over this city. Volok's got a new big machine he's building, right? And then they come at you and you kill them. Then you get level 2, right? Like you've had your stern conversation, you've had your fight against 3 goblins, you've done your level 1 time. Now it's time to get to level 2. I'd say the only time where you might not do that is if you're brand new to D&D. Maybe spend a little bit more time at level 1 just learning the basics. The problem is you're still more likely to die.
I like leveling slowly. I have made my players in my home campaign, which I'm running later tonight, bleed over this issue because they didn't want to have levels 1 to 2.
Right.
So when I ran Tomb of Annihilation, they're like, please, we want to start at level 3.
Right.
A couple of them wanted to even go higher. I'm like, well, I don't really want to level the entire thing up. Right. So what I said was, we're going to level pretty slowly, and I'm not planning on increasing the top of the adventure. Right? So like, things will be quicker, and you don't have to worry about the level 1, 2 death or lameness or whatever.
Oh, but so then you did start at level 3 or something like that?
We started at level 3, and they finally hit 10 in our last session.
Yeah.
And we've been running we're almost at the 2-year mark.
Yeah. So I actually think that Tomb is a little bit like that. Like I ran Tomb and I think we took 14 months. I did start them at 1st level and they got to, I think 9th or 10th level by the end.
Yeah.
I don't think I think they were like 9th or 10th level. And in some cases they didn't level for like 7 weeks.
Yeah.
Right. And it was because I was like, well, you guys haven't hit Omu yet. And you did all this other craziness. And I'm not going to have you show up in Omu at level 11 and just destroy everything.
Right. Or you've got to level everything up higher.
So that was a tricky, that's sort of like that milestone or checkpoint advancement idea. And it's like, but the checkpoint is really far. And the problem is they accomplished a lot. They should have leveled.
Sure.
They didn't. And like you, I didn't want to level them up.
Yeah.
There's another, right. So there's that idea of like, well, what is a tier appropriate situation, right? And then building these sort of tier appropriate situations. And that's where I think I talked to you about like the level 1 to 20 null campaign that I put on the site. It was just sort of a fun, what would a 20th level campaign look like if you broke it out into each level and what would happen? And the first one is like you come across a dying hyena, right? And that's like your level 1 situation, right? And you're smiling and laughing. It's like, how lame is that? Like, oh man, you know, we found you kill like 2 hyenas and then one of them bursts into a knoll, right? Or, you know, and you kind of like, this is what happens when hyenas get poisoned by Yenagu's blood, right?
But well, that's where it's cool, right? That's the part that you go,
so I think when we talk about rats in the cellar, right? Like, I don't see it as like Warcraft level farming, right? To me, it's not like you go in and the dude's sweeping and he's like, oh, you want a meal? Go down and clear the rats out, right? And because he's like, I just can't be bothered, right? And instead, it's like, you know, my wife got bitten by a rat and she's dying. And my son went down there and disappeared, right? And we found, and there's like a hole in the floor. There's a sub basement I didn't even know was there. And it's like 150 years old. Right. And there's an idol down there. And when I looked at it, I went crazy. Right. And then you can build
it full of flumps.
No, those are rat pods. There's a whole breed of rats.
How do I shut down this call? I can't remember what the exit.
No, that's Rudy. Yeah, that's right. He's supposed to cut the connection whenever you say flump. I forgot about that. That's all right. We'll keep going. Flump, 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 flump. There's another idea in this that I'd like to throw by you and see what you think. And it's nerdy. So unlike the rest of this conversation, which is pretty above board. And the nerdy part is I consider it the power series of levels and the power series of challenge rating.
Okay.
And the idea here is that if you think about how many giant rats are in Faerun, right? There's a lot of them.
Sure.
Right? There's millions of giant rats in Faerun, probably. If you think about ancient red dragons in Faerun, there might be 3 or 4. Right.
But not according to the lore of the realms. But go ahead.
Is that how many ancient red dragons are in Faerun?
Kind of surprising number. If you like do that, there's that Wikipedia FR Wikipedia page. If you go in and like famed dragons of Faerun,
it's a lot of ancient dragons.
Kind of astonishing. It's definitely unsustainable ecologically.
Okay, well that kind of blows my philosophy.
But I know what you mean.
My point is that like and same like when in a city, like there aren't if you think about the number of cultists to archmages, right? It's not even a linear progression. It's exponential. There are logarithmically fewer archmages than there are cultists.
It's like decibels.
Right. Yeah, right. It's like decibels. It's like earthquakes, right? It's the same math as an earthquake.
Exactly.
So, and challenge rating, you can think of it. That's a really good think of challenge rating like magnitude of earthquakes, right? It's exponentially bigger the higher up. And when we're talking about number of them, right?
Right. There shouldn't be that many. Yeah.
There's not just hundreds and hundreds of beholders floating around in a single cavern.
Right.
Luckily, right? And now until you get to the outer planes. And it's like the number of ice devils that are wandering around in Faerun, not a lot. The number of them in Kenya, the 8th layer of hell, lots of ice devils. Right. And that's where like getting to that tier 3 or tier 4, where you travel, like you're going to travel outside a place.
Yeah.
Right. And that was where in our conversations, I brought up my favorite encounter that I like to drag out and beat up, which was the dress shop robbery in Adventurers League. Right. And I don't know if I talked about it in the show before, but and it was some Adventurers League adventure. And we were in the middle of there was like a big war going on. I think it was in Mulmaster or something like that. Big war going on in Mulmaster. And our group is wandering through and there's a bunch of people robbing the dress shop. And we're like, get the hell out of there. And they like draw swords. And it was like 3 swashbucklers and 2 bandit captains.
Yeah.
Right. And I was like, what the hell are swashbucklers and bandit captains doing robbing a dress shop? And the other people at the table are like, whoa, this is great. Like, I get to show off all my character. But I'm like, they should be bandits, right? They should be like 6 bandits. And I should be able to hit a fireball and they're all dead. That's the bandits, right? And it was one of these like, well, it has to be challenge rating appropriate in order for you to gain the amount of experience to do the adventure. They got to And I was just like, there's not that many swashbucklers, right, in the world. Robbing dress shops, right? And why would 2 bandit captains be together at all, right? Yeah. Like, which one of you is in charge? So I think that I think people hang on too tightly to, I need to find challenge rating appropriate monsters to challenge my players without thinking about whether or not those make sense for the story. I know that's true in many AL adventures that I played.
So I really agree with you on the premise that it's, you know, the story needs to make sense, right? And so like the dress shop robbery and you know, like I feel bad whenever I'm talking about a real actual adventure that I didn't write.
Yeah,
And I just want to state that I've made many mistakes and people should feel absolutely
not me. All mine
welcome to criticize
my
stuff.
Awesome. Yeah,
but I think where this, and I have not played or read this encounter, so I don't know what I'm talking about except for you. So it's all your fault. But where it sounds to me is like, you know, so one is that it's not a particularly compelling or engaging scene, except because
it was battle 2 of 3 in our 4-hour adventure.
And I think it also suffers from the idea that this was a piece that needs to have the or fight component, and therefore it has to be this way, right? And so I would argue that that's probably where you know, the author, editor, developer goes in and goes, you know, let's shake this up and change it and to a way that it could work. And I think even on Twitter, we got a number of ideas for how it could be fun, right? And without having to be 2 swashbucklers or whatever it was, right? It could be retooled to not just be combat appropriate. So maybe that's point 1. I don't know if I want to say anything about that.
Yeah, and the example I brought up where I thought it was awesome was in James Intercasso's Planet of Tarrasques, in which there's a bunch of Tarrasques trashing Waterdeep, and there's a bunch of thugs robbing a dress shop or robbing a shop, and you have to like figure, you know, do you do anything about it? Like you're busy fighting Tarrasques, and it was one of my favorite scenes in that game because standing on a decapitated Tarrasque head, naked, because I found out that wearing armor against the Tarrasque doesn't matter because they'll hit me on a 2 no matter what, right? 2 or above. And I stood on it with my vorpal sword and pointed at him. I'm like, you guys, watch it, right? And and then they roll the intimidation check with advantage because I'm on a Tarrasque head. And they're like, okay, right? And it was this great kind of fun scene.
Yeah.
He didn't say like 5 champions are robbing a dress shop, right? Like he said, no, they're just thugs.
Yeah.
And I think that there's, go ahead.
It was funny that I think you said, like, there's no way James Introcasso did the math on, you know, 100 Tarrasques or something, and he produces the math, right? But it
and it was like
level appropriate.
It was like 5 million experience points, though, right?
Well, level 20, you know.
100 Tarrasques is pretty high.
Where I do disagree somewhat, but you know, so I agree on this premise thing, but my kind of second thing with this kind of an encounter is that I do not have an issue with, but I know many DMs do, one of your and I's favorite discussion points, and that is escalating the challenge for your party's level.
Okay.
So famous example that you like to talk about is a rope that is harder to climb because your characters are higher level.
The high level rope. Hey, that rope
kinder example is that the lock is harder to pick, right? So in theory, locks really just have a particular DC and then you're done. That's as hard as a lock.
Depends on the lock.
That's the way 5e is.
Right.
4e was written more where it scales with your party, and so lock could be any level, right? Or we saw kobolds that were like, you know, special, like there were dragon shield kobolds that were like tough at mid-level, and then there were
ghouls. Right.
There were like epic, you know,
25
servants of Tiamat kobolds that were like major fights, right? They were hugely difficult, and all things like were kind of scaled like that. And I like that scaling because to me, I'm telling a story that revolves around the PCs, right? It's the world is what the PCs experience, not everything that's just around it. And so when they are busting into a place, the lock is a hard one because they're facing a formidable foe or an important thing that's been guarded that is appropriate to their tier. So it's not a DC 12 lock because you can't protect really important stuff with a DC 12 lock. So you need a special lock. If you're climbing up a wall, it's a hard thing to climb because this is a crazy tough place somehow.
So this is where I think you and I agree for the most part, right? That like, to me, it's about the box you're picking. And it's about the level of the box, not the level of the characters. If level 4 characters broke into Orcus's inner sanctum in Thanatos and tried to break into the box where he keeps the wand of Orcus, that's a DC 30 check, and it's probably covered with power word kills. You know, glyphs of order.
Sure.
It doesn't matter what the characters' levels are, but if they are 20th level, they might actually be able to break in and get it, right? And likewise, if your level 12 characters break into the dress shop and rob because that's what level 12 characters do, is they break into dress shops along with the bandit captains, that if they want to go, they're just short of some money and they break into the local dress shop and they hit like the box
dresses.
What's that?
If you just like dresses.
Yeah, well, they just need a little extra coin.
Hottest fashions,
Yeah, they lost it while carousing. So they find the locked box underneath the counter that doesn't have like a DC 25 lock on it, because a DC 25 lock probably costs 50,000 gold pieces, right? It's probably a DC 12,
right?
And then they hit it and open it. So I same way, like if there's a reason why the rope is a real pain in the ass to climb,
right?
It doesn't matter what level the characters are. That rope is still a pain in the ass, right?
And I would generally say that, in the case of this high level characters where the lock should be inconsequential, just don't have there be a lock. Like, don't waste time on that.
Or unless just say there's a lock and you easily bust it, right?
Yeah, unless you want that to be like an injection of like a reminder that, hey, you're dealing with this mundane world of regular shop folk. So it's a DC 8. It's like such a bad lock.
Yeah.
If you want to underscore that, great. Otherwise, there's just not a lock there. Like, just take the stuff.
Right. Yeah. Let's jump to some questions. We got a lot of questions going on. I see some in chat. I see some in Twitter. We are here, of course. We have our guardian angel, who is I think a challenge 25 Solar, Rudy Basso.
That's true.
Yeah, that's accurate. Cool. Hey, great
arrows of flame.
Yeah. We have a question on Twitter from former guest DM David.
Oh, David Hartledge.
How do you add wonder to first level adventures?
Okay.
That's the guy who writes the best blog, right?
It's a pretty great blog. Hey, I only have a silver Any, so I can't really.
Congratulations on your Any.
Thank you. That was
amazing.
I'm very happy about that. Yeah.
That's pretty good. That was tough competition too.
It was. I was surprised.
I was surprised too. Good job. Well, you work hard. You deserve it.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah. I have a big mailing list too.
What did David say?
David asked, how do you add wonder to a low level adventure? Is that what he asked?
First level adventure.
A first level. How do you add wonder to a first level adventure? We talked a little bit about that, but if you have any other, I've got an idea, but go ahead.
I go back to it's got to be engaging play, right? And so if you're going to have a mundane premise, then you've got to dress it up with some really interesting, compelling pieces around it. Yeah. So if you're really going to do rats in the basement, I think, you kind of described a scenario that would be a lot more compelling, right? My kid's missing this, or even just like, I went down today and all my grain's gone, all of it, but I see no signs of theft, right? And you breathe in some, and then you maybe there are several rooms down below, and there are just these signs of something having happened, right? And you get that Stephen King kind of mode. Then you can make it seem like it's worthwhile. But if you describe it as cleaning out the grease trap and it executes like cleaning out the grease trap, we have day jobs. Yeah. We don't need this.
Yeah. I agree. That to me, evocative narration is the key to making it epic. And, again, if you want to make the rats in the basement, like if you haven't read Graveyard Shift, and you're doing rats in the basement, you should read Graveyard Shift. And it has to do with that, like how do you describe the rats? How do they smell? What's their greasy hair, and the fact that they're all covered in pustules, and that some of them seem to have like weird bony protuberances piercing out of their back. You don't know why, and they all have a weird symbol on their forehead of a swirl. Like where did they get that swirl scar, right? And it's like you throw secrets. So I talk about secrets and clues, right? Like things that characters can discover that sort of matter to them. Throw those secrets and clues in there. They find a corpse. The corpse has, oh my God, this is our buddy that we saw 3 weeks ago, and he's been eaten by the rats. So, but to me, I think the big,
it could be an alchemist shop, and you do the kind of thing. I like doing this not quite at level 1, a little later when you need a little spice up, but you still want mundane, which is something like it's the alchemist shop, and so there's all these unstable reagents down there.
Yeah, right. It's
there's a lot. It's not just lame rats. Like there's pretty interesting, and some of the rats have been changed too.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
So, players get changed, rats are changed.
Right. Yeah. Rat pods. What else you got?
So I think you guys are kind of going back and forth on Twitter on this, but we'll talk about it again. Awesome. Farkish now says, when DMing for a group that's new to Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop RPGs, what's the best way to introduce them to combat encounters they likely can't defeat yet?
What do you say, Teos?
So I even the best players, I think, fall prey to this, where they just sort of assume they can take everything. And I think the second part that makes it difficult is that D&D is not very good for retreating.
Mhm.
Often, by the time players want to retreat, some of them are severely wounded, and it's very easy to drop them, and then retreat just goes to heck, right?
Mhm.
It falls apart because of the way movement and actions and rounds, it's just not a capable system for kind of doing a fun retreat, a neat reverse chase or something. So I tend to try to telegraph to my players early on that I will throw overwhelming things at them. So when I ran Tomb of Annihilation, very early on, I think it was the first time we stepped into the forest and they're in the jungle and they're low levels. They had a thing where they found signs through various checks, various skill checks, where they realized something massive has come through here. And then they saw, I think it was a T-Rex and a Triceratops, signs of both of these, right? Which is, I mean, you got to be pretty missing it to not realize that's way above. And then you had a number of ways that it could develop, so that it could be the two of them fight each other, or you just miss them both, or whatever. And so that the whole scenario was clearly pointed at: avoid detection, right? These things will destroy you. And that was how I was giving a message to my players of sometimes there may be things that you just can't overcome. You want to use alternate reaction or alternate options.
Unfortunately, I completely agree with you. Yeah, and I think my first argument is like try to avoid situations, especially with new people, where you put them up against foes they can't defeat. That I'm probably being overly harsh. That feels arrogant to me.
Mm.
It feels like a DM trying to say, I want to show you how hard my world is by throwing you up against this big ass thing, when like, this is where I go in the other direction, which is like, go ahead and throw giant rats at them because they can beat the giant rats, right? Like, let them have a success and let them grow with that success. Now there are times where you're like running, so I think the biggest description of this is, or the biggest, like a great example that many people are familiar with is Horde of the Dragon Queen, where you go into greenest and it's being attacked by kobolds and rat swarms, and and an adult, I think it's a young blue or an adult blue dragon, and you're like, holy cow, like, and I remember like my players like, I'm not going there, like, I'm level 1, I'm not going into it. I'm not going to a town with a freaking dragon.
Well, and it's funny because even if you look at, I don't know which run it was, but for some group of relatively inexperienced players that were, I think, way into fantasy, but sort of first time playing D&D for some of them, Mike Merles ran a table of that. And I think he started them in an open field with the dragon attacking. And so under that structure, it was sort of like, what would you like to do? And like, I don't know, there's a dragon, I should attack it,
right. Like, what other options are there?
Yeah. And so that's where I think, another answer to this is think through what your reason is for this thing being here.
Right.
And make that the cool movie scene, the cool thing. And I think the adventure tries to do that, maybe not as well as it should, which is probably why it's getting rearranged.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see how they're going to fix it.
To say, okay, there's this threat here. Let's make it really clear. And maybe you feel smart, but you know that you're going to uncover this, that this is too much. So what can you do to help, right? Heroism is called for, but very quickly you need to be able to identify that. Otherwise, you're going to say, well, I guess I shoot at it. Right. Okay, E2, right? Like, that's not fun. So we want a different mechanic.
I think that the number of times a DM should throw insurmountable foes up against their party should be very, very small, and with really good reason.
Yeah.
I think that's something to think about carefully. And
the fun needs to be that power series they do.
Right. Like, how many villagers in all of Faerun ever see a blue dragon? And you just happen to see it the first day, you're out and about. So like, they shouldn't be that common in the first place.
Yeah.
Rudy, what else you got?
So this is kind of, I guess, a follow-up to that. At Tim Bannock asks specifically, how often do you use deadly encounters? When you say insurmountable, do you include that as well? How far into the deadly XP range do you go?
Teos, what do you think?
So deadly is weird because D&D encounter building is really...
See our last show if you want to...
Yeah, see our last... I was just going to say that.
Talk a lot about that. Yeah.
So when I worked on writing a D&D open, whether the players were new or experienced, they could often handle multiple deadly encounters. without a problem. In fact, a common thing to do was 2 deadly and 2 hard encounters,
Mm-hmm.
and they could get through it, right? Players are surprisingly resourceful in their characters too, as long as not being, completely mean. But just deadly alone is not enough of a signal. So I think you really want to know your audience, whether it's published, organized play, your home campaign. You need to know who it is that you're challenging and what it is that you're trying to do with that encounter. When I'm designing for something where I don't specifically know my group, if I know my group, I'm tailoring to that. And whatever deadly means, then I do that. Maybe deadly really is, I choose deadly for 2 levels higher than they actually are. And that might be awesome. Well, then that's what I use. And I use that as often as I want to have that level of challenge. When I'm writing for publishing, what I usually do is I try to go by the book plus a little harder.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, Mike, I tend to actually use all that math and stuff that the book gives us, flawed as it is. I use that as a starting point. But then I add into the encounter a lot of things that players or DMs can do to ratchet down or up the difficulty,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they can choose to do these things beyond just the normal, like, take some hit points away or whatever. There are things in the encounter that you can use to change it up as a DM.
Yeah, I agree with you completely in our controversial show. I think that so it's important to recognize that deadly is anything over hard and above, which is a huge range. So deadly is 100 Tarrasques, or it's 1 level of just above. So I think when we're talking about it in this context, we're talking about over the edge of hard and just into deadly, right? And I think a lot of it is dependent upon a DM knowing what their players' capabilities are, knowing what the characters, well, players and characters, like sometimes players just work really well together and their synergy is really good and their characters are really effective. Then you can kind of play with deadly, and that's why I think the only time, so yes, if you're writing a published adventure, it's one thing. That's a pretty small number of people compared to the DMs running games. And when you're a DM running a game, I think it's useful to know when you have designed an encounter that has edged into deadly.
Yeah.
By keeping that, as we talked about in the other show, I have a little equation in my head, right? And the equation just helps me know, is this deadly? Like the 2 Ettins against level 3s, is that deadly? That feels deadly, right? Mm-hmm. And then if it is deadly, I just want to be more careful with it. Maybe that still fits the situation, but I'm not going to just have these guys go and beat the snot out of level 3s.
Yeah.
Give them an option. So I think it's useful for people to know when something has crossed into deadly. And then, I agree a lot, especially if you don't know the capabilities of the characters, of having your hands on the dials, as I like to say. Like there are things that you can manipulate during a game. I don't know how you feel about this. I think you mentioned it in someone else's post. But like, go ahead and change hit points up while it's going on.
Right.
Change the damage up while it's going on. Have guys run or die or whatever, so that you can kind of tune a battle. I think especially for boss battles or battles where the stakes are really high, it's like the climax of the adventure, then you want to have it in that, like, we're struggling to get through. And you have your hands on those dials all the time.
I work harder than most designers, I think, at kind of getting the numbers right. Mm-hmm. And I still would say to anybody running something that I've done that the math's not some truth, right? Like this is just what I ended up with. Your group's probably different, and just the way you might say a few things can totally shake up the challenge of it, right? Any minor thing can shake it up, or the players can shake it up with their actions. One bad mistake or one move that turns out to not be a good move can really shift how an encounter plays out. So adjust the dials, right? Change things up. There is no truth to the world. You don't want to make it obvious to your players that you're doing that when you do it,
behind the screen.
But you should do it, right? So there's just that art of saying, like, and it drops.
Yeah, right.
It had 15 hit points. Who cares? The players are having plenty of challenge. They don't need another round of it attacking, right? That's just a thing to do.
Yeah.
I think there is another side to this question that says, like, how often should your encounters be really challenging? Right? Versus really easy, or just kind of flat in the middle. And that's also, I think, something that varies, right? So kind of how do you do your challenge level up or down, and what's rewarding for your players is worth thinking about. Some people, I tend to I'm a pretty tactical DM. Like I run hard. And so players generally say, like, you're a hard ass. You know, like you push us a lot, but they also feel like they like that, right? Like one of the DMs in my group, that's a player in my group, said, "I now run harder for my players." It's kind of cool, but there are times you need to have those easy encounters, and you know, it's not everything is right.
Yeah, so this is one where I think we may disagree a little bit, which is I tend not to even break things up in encounters like that all that often. So I don't think about like how many encounters the group has had in a day. I think about you know, but I'm also running published adventures a lot of times. Like I'm running Saltmarsh now, and I've run, you know, all the other ones before. So but an example is like the Cellar. This is a spoiler for Secret of Saltmarsh. That in the Cellar, I had them all kind of attack based on what the characters did. And I recognize that like if they're facing 5 bandits, 3 scouts, and a wizard at the same time at level 2, that's going to be really rough. But I did have basically one long battle where they faced 5 bandits, 3 scouts, and a wizard. It was just broken up into different pieces, you know. I would give them things like, you know, with your keen ears, like a guy was like, I want to thunder wave this guy over here. And I'm like, well, with your keen ears, you hear a whole group of them bunched up in this other cave. And he's like, and I said, but to get to him, you're going to take an opportunity attack from the guy you're fighting. He's like, I don't care. And he flew in. He's an Aarakocra, flies in, thunder waves, and hits like 4 guys at once and kills 2 of them outright. Right?
Awesome.
Turned it right. And it was very epic. But I didn't think about, and I tend not to think about like, you know, how many battles are going to be easy, medium, or hard over an adventuring day, right? I've kind of thrown that idea out, and it's sort of like this is the way things are organized in this area, you know.
Well, and it's fascinating that Wizards was saying that they don't expect you to do that. That they actually assume the way the game is written assumes that everybody always is fully fine.
Yeah.
Even though they have these rules for sort of running out of steam and using up, you know, so many encounters per day, whatever. They don't expect you to kind of individually do that, and the math is not.
And their adventures are not written that way anymore, right? I
don't tend to think about, you know, what is my daily max or anything like that.
Right.
It's more that what I will do is say I should shake it up from time to time.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And it depends. I think Tomb of Annihilation is a campaign where it's supposed to kind of feel pretty rough.
Yeah.
So it feels rough more, right? But I think something like, say, Saltmarsh is where it makes sense to have like ooh, what's that? It's a giant tick. Okay, we killed it. Whew, okay, it didn't grab us. You know, it was an on-off. Could have been hard, wasn't. Right. And the next one might be like, oh man, these were really scary. And then the next one is, you know, okay, this is a medium fight. Like that's fine. To me, that works for that kind of adventure,
right. So we have hit the hour mark, and I know you have a game to get off to. Do you have time for 1 or 2 more questions, or do you need to run? What time? So I'm managing your time effectively. When do you need to go?
10 minutes.
10 minutes. Very good. Teos. I'm sorry, not Teos. Rudy, what do you got?
Well, speaking of time management, He's Nacho Problem in chat asks, do you have advice for designing thrilling level one-shot adventures where time is paramount? Specifically, if you have a 4-hour window and you don't want to short the party for the culminating encounter.
Yes. Teos, what do you think?
I don't know. You say while I think.
You want me?
I thought you had an idea.
I have an idea because I'm doing this right now. So I'm writing a book. I'll tell you about my next book. I'm writing a book called Ruins of the Grendel Root, Fantastic Adventures, Ruins of the Grendel Root, which is 10 short adventures for D&D, base level 1 to 5. And the first of them is called Call of Starsong Tower, and it's available for free. Anybody can go and download it and play it. It's fully published, fully edited by Scott Fitzgerald Gray, who our good friend and one of the best. It's got beautiful maps and everything else. So you can go and download it and play it right now. It's got pre-gen characters ready to go. And that one is a 2-hour adventure. It's intended and tuned for around a 2-hour adventure. And the way that I primarily, so I again, thinking about the dials that a DM can turn, I wanted one of the designs of these 10 adventures is that all of them have dials that the DM can turn to tune the length of time that it takes. And there's a few that are kind of in every one of them. And then there's some where they are designed specifically for the guy. If somebody can find the link, I'm sure. Somebody in chat's asking what the link is. Awesome. So one of the easy dials is removing combat encounters or adding combat encounters, right? Combat encounters can take anywhere from about 30 minutes to 30, or, you know, depends on what kind, how many, it depends on how many giant rats you have in your first level encounter. But it's, it can be, anywhere from like 15 to 45 minutes, maybe, if it's like a really big fight, but probably at level 1, it's probably going to be pretty small, 15 to 30 minutes. So if you want it longer, you can kind of add more stuff like that. And if you want it shorter, you can cut it. So you can say like, I only want to have like one initial confrontation and then one fight at the end. And I'll use that. But then there's also, this is something that I saw in a Monty Cook Games put out a book for Numenera called Explorer's Keys for Numenera. And their trick is something I like to refer to as the moving MacGuffin. And the idea here is that you have these things that you need in order to solve the adventure. It might be a piece of information, it might be a key, it might be just something you need, some object or some person or something like that. And if you can build your adventure so that that thing is movable, and maybe it shows up right when they arrive, and maybe it shows up later in the game, that lets you tune how long the game takes. So if you want somebody to have a 4-hour game, and they're cutting through things quickly, you can take that MacGuffin and move it further out. Yeah. Now the trick is you got to have material there.
Right.
It needs to be big enough already to handle that 4 hours, or else people will know. But you can do that. Like there's. Yeah. I'm not against random encounters and stuff like that. So you can kind of put some fun things in there. Just don't beat them heavily with combat after combat after combat.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. The idea of you have things you can turn on or off to help. And I think when you're creating each of your main scenes, you want to think, is this one that could run long, or is this one that could run short? And then you build your sliders based on that. You give the DM some tools based on that. Like I did the adventure for Adventures League called The Artifact, and it's based on the board game Clue, right? And so you are talking to all these different ghosts to figure out who did it with which weapon. The where is not critical, but you're doing the first two that is in a game of Clue. And one of the things that can happen is you could just luck out and figure it out really early, or you might have to go to like all the places. Right. So in there, I placed instructions for what happens under these different scenarios. How can you handle that, right? And it tends to run pretty well. And what often happens is that if it's not a convention game, people just want to keep playing because they're having fun, right? But if it's a convention scene, then they use these tools to shortcut to that right duration. But I think it's an excellent question. It's a very kind of timely question because Adventures League is trying to do now these adventures that can be 2 hours to 4 hours with these optional pieces in them. And sometimes they are not working well because of that. For example, we used to with the idea of the people are robbing dresses from the shop. Well, if you just intimidate them away, that took you 2 minutes. If you fight, there's no way it's the same duration.
Yeah.
So it really requires handling. You can't have that different of a slider because it's too hard to compensate. So you're going to have something else come along. If you're really allowing that option of a full fight versus a dress intimidation and then we're done, well, you've got to have something else for those people to play or it's not going to work out. And now you're doing a lot of design work, right? So it's probably worth going back and thinking through, well, if the times must be the same, then it needs to be more compelling than simply intimidating them away. You talk to them and they go, well, the reason we're doing it is because this other threat.
Right.
And you got to, help that.
That's why it's 2 bandit captains and 3 swashbucklers. Do we have time for one more question?
Sure.
All right. Rudy, one more question. Make it a good one. Not these, the other ones have been great. Make them as good as
sure. From the IDDM on Twitter.
Michael Mallon.
Structurally, what is different between a level 1, 10, or 20 encounter? How can behaviors be changed as scope and scale increases?
What do you think of that, Teos?
So I think this kind of takes me to my thought. The way I feel about this is kind of like I said before, where I think it's helpful to have these constructs in mind, the sort of the small town thing, the region, the whole world, the planar. That's good to know. And similarly, an encounter, you want to have really epic stuff as you go up. That's where you expect I'm fighting over a pool of magma, right? And this kind of really thrilling stuff is going on in your higher level encounters. But that's kind of your baseline expectation. And again, play should be compelling. So it's not like level 1 should be or low level should be I'm just going through a cavern with no features and there's just, a snake. Like, right? Like, great, that's not engaging and compelling.
I could
So
make
maybe it's
those
not,
things.
enormous pools of deadly magma that will kill me automatically, but something else that's interesting, like hot gas erupts at various points, or, and then it's a fire snake. And so there are ways to do this so that you still keep it engaging. I don't tend to approach low level versus high level super differently from a structural perspective. I don't know if you do.
For me, it's all scope. I think the scope of the story, that the level of the threat that they're. If we're talking hard fights, right? If we're talking sort of the big challenging ones, but like when I think about the high level characters in Storm King's Thunder, or Tomb of Annihilation, one area that changed for me is the number of monsters I'm willing to throw at the characters. And when they get to the higher levels, I'm willing to throw dozens to literally hundreds to maybe even 1,000 monsters at the party. And it's because they can deal with it, right?
Yeah.
I threw 1,000 skeletons against a group and they beat it with a wall of fire, right? And it's because they were getting chased down a hall by 1,000 skeletons.
Yeah.
They threw up a wall of fire and the skeletons just poured through it and they melted and they formed a wall of molten bone.
Yeah.
All the ones from behind from getting through, right? And it was very epic and very cool. You probably don't want to throw, I think I threw 40 whites at a group once. And even at their level, like they were 13th or 14th, and that was still an ass kicking, right? Like 40 whites are no joke. No, at even higher CR. So that, breadth, I will throw a lot more monsters, more low level monsters.
I think also as I get higher level, I put in mechanics to things that I'm designing that are really like, ooh, pucker up moments. So like I created an encounter for Tomb of Annihilation where the players find these important named NPCs, and they're unconscious and they look sort of weirdly desiccated. And then there's this nest in the back wall and it's kind of buzzing. And what ends up being is it's full of sturges. And what was supposed to happen is the players would kind of maybe figure out, like, maybe I don't want to disturb this thing, because eventually like a sturge just comes out. It was just a low level sturge.
Right.
And you beat it up and it dies.
Right.
But then like the hive sort of responds and two come out, right? So this message was supposed to be, don't mess with this. What they did was mess with it. So then comes out this mother, and this is where this is a high level component of it, is that the mother of all sturges emerges.
Like a Chasme.
And it was like a Chasme. It was actually based off a Chasme with some other monster thrown in. And what it did was it expelled like an enormous burst of sturges. And I rolled something like 2d4 for every player. And that was how many sturges were automatically stuck in them. And nothing threatens players like damage, right? And suddenly they realize, hey, I'm losing this many hit points every round.
Right. I'm getting completely eaten.
So very quickly, they're summoning like a bonfire, the summon bonfire thing, and people are voluntarily running.
I was gonna say, just fireball my position.
Exactly.
Like it's better than sturges.
Right. And so that's where you can see the toggle there, the difference between how I might have created that encounter for level 1, where it's just individual sturges and it doesn't have a heat up mechanic, to having heat up mechanic, to having this beastly queen thing that comes out and just auto impales you with sturges, right?
Yeah.
Like okay.
So I also think that there's, and this is one where you and I've had, I think getting kind of going full circle back, is I am willing to have relatively low challenge encounters up against high level players when the circumstance accounts for it. And the example was, and I brought this up in our previous show that we did, where there were a bunch of like tribal Bedine guys that were worshippers of Imrith, the blue dragon. And they all attack, like they're fanatically loyal to Imrith, and they attacked the group when the group went to the Forbidden City where Imrith lives. And my wife killed all of them with one hit. Right. And there's part of you that's like, and I thought it was just epic, right? Like this was a turning point for me as a DM to really revel in watching an encounter with that many guys just be over in a second. Right. But boy, it told a lot about the characters. And I've thought about today, I'm rereading The Gunslinger by Stephen King. And there's a scene in The Gunslinger where he goes to this town and it turns out his rival has like brainwashed the whole town and everybody attacks him. And he just stands at the front of the town and he kills every single person in the town, right? With his 6-shooters. And you're like, because he's Roland Deschain, right? He's like the gunslinger. He doesn't get hit by any of these guys.
Right.
Guy with a pitchfork, it's not going to do anything to him, right? But the horror was that he wiped out a town, right? Yeah. So it wasn't without consequence. And likewise, and I wish I had gone back and added more to this, that like my wife wiped out a whole tribe, right? Like these people have been passing the generational torch of this tribe for centuries, and she wiped it out in a single hit, right? That power should have been, Dickie Adams says 19. Somebody here is a gunslinger fan. So that's the secret. Dickie. If you hear the word 19, it means you will find out what's on the other side and probably go crazy. So we all have to make madness checks.
Nice.
Yeah. So
those kinds of repercussions
to that. What's that?
That's where. So I threw some of those Aldani lobster folk that are like really nothing when the party was towards the end of running through the jungle on Tomb of Annihilation.
Right.
And it ended up being a hilarious fight, non-fight, a hilarious encounter where the players actually threw weapons to them. So like, here, arm yourselves. You guys are so weak. And they're like, no, we don't want weapons. Weapons are horrible. Take them back.
Right.
And it was it was very classic.
There could be something really fun about being way overpowered. I mean, again, like we brought the same. Now we're treading the same ground. Ewoks, right? We're like, don't poke me with your stick. Like I have a lightsaber, like. But you kind of have to work with them because you're like, oh, these poor guys. Like we're not going to wipe out a whole tribe full of grungs.
And then it pays off, right? The big payoff at the end when they're.
So I think that thinking about those low level, high level ones, I think there's, it's obviously very different when you're facing a bunch of grungs at level 3 than when you're facing them at 13.
Yeah.
But you can do both, and the feeling changes, and that's good, right? Like that approach changes.
Yeah.
So Teos, this has been, as always, this is the third time. You're the only person who's been on this show 3 times. So I must like you.
That was a mistake.
Well, we'll see. We'll see how the ratings are on YouTube later, right? But it has been awesome to have you on the show. I'm glad that we completely solved this online disagreement between you and I. I feel good. I'm sure we won't. Now it's all smooth sailing. Virtual hug. I'm sure it's all smooth sailing on Twitter until probably, I don't know, tomorrow at 9 a.m. is our regular come up with a debate.
We all agree that rats in the basement are a terrible idea.
Man, epic rats in the basement. I'm just going to quote every line from that story at you for like the next 2 weeks until you've read the entire story.
Thanks for having me on.
It's always, where can people find you? What have you done recently that you want to call some attention to?
I will be at PAX West, which is coming up. I will have a seminar with a bunch of other really talented folks about making someone else's world your own. And it is on Friday at PAX. I don't have the exact, but it's my pinned tweet. So if you go to @AlphaStream, you'll find the info there. And we're going to talk about how you make Green Flame work and not kill off Jim Darkmagic. How do you not kill Elminster? What do you do with Star Trek phasers to, keep within the lines of other people's properties? We're going to have someone from Board Games, from Lone Shark Games talking about it. We'll have folks that work on D&D and more. So it's going to be a really cool seminar. And I'll be part of, there's a signing panel, which is pretty cool honor, crazy, at PAX, and a couple other PAX events there that I'll be. Otherwise, people can find me on Twitter @AlphaStream and my blog, alphastream.org, which is not as good as yours or David's.
It is a great blog. I read it. I read it. It's not as good as David's, but it's pretty good. David's a high bar. Let's be honest. Dude's like a PhD researcher in D&D articles.
Oh, he's so good.
Thank you once again. Thank you to everybody in Twitch chat, and thanks to everybody who submitted awesome questions. Thanks to Rudy Basso for managing the show and taking care of everything. And we will see you next time. Have a great night. Good luck with your game.